Hey guys, so I have been working on the outline for the sequel to The Broken Queen. The working title currently is The Shattered King, and you know, when a second book hits, it hits hard. You already know the characters, you already know the setup, now you're just excited to see them like get closer, the emotional beats hit harder because you already care about them. But if this is the second book in a trilogy, you're not at the ending yet. You don't have to say goodbye. You don't have to deal with the big wrap-up finale yet. If you're somebody who really loves books for their characters, I feel like the second book is like sometimes the best book. But it's also like so hard because you're in the middle and you can't just establish everything. You're past that. You can't wrap everything up. You're not there yet. You're in the middle. So that's where I've been. And I realized it was time to do the index card outlining method, which I have not done since I wrote Kingdoms of Sky and Shadow. That was the last time that I had a book so involved that I had to write it down on index cards, or you might use Post-it notes or whatever works for you. I don't have wall space to slap up all my Post-it notes. So let's talk about how to plot out a really complicated novel. So somebody asked me recently, like, how long does it take you to plot a novel? And the answer is sometimes no time at all, like an hour. I'll just sit down and write the outline. Sometimes I barely write an outline. I just start writing and it just works. This book, as well as The Broken Queen itself, took like months to plot. Basically, I wrote down like a few things I want to happen throughout the book. I started writing. I got stuck. I wrote like a little longer of an outline. I wrote a little more. I got stuck again, but I was far enough along that I thought, okay, I am now ready to sit down and really, really outline this sucker. But I still was kind of stumped on a few of the elements, so first, what I did is I sat down, I just wrote down, like, I got as far as I could. I wrote down what I knew was going to happen and where each character started and where I wanted them to be. But there were also a lot of questions along the way where I thought, I am not there yet. I don't know how I want to deal with this part of the plot. There's like a few different courses I could go maybe, and I'm not sure which one to choose. Or I kind of know what thing-ish I want to happen, but I'm not sure what exactly it's going to be. There were some various moments like that. So I wrote all that out, and then I wrote down those questions. If I was stuck, I just left it like, should this happen or this happen? What happens here? I had left off with these characters where, you know, the team was starting to gel. Characters that were rivals were starting to become friends, and then also the team had gotten split up. So as a writer, and hopefully as a reader as well, what I really want to see is like everybody to come back together and, you know, defeat the bad guy. So there's your basic, very broad stroke. But it's only book 2, so it can't be the ultimate battle yet. You need like the second tier battle. I also knew that I would have more multiple point of views in this book than in the first book because the team is broken up and I've got to show what's happening with the characters that have been separated, so they need like a full point of view. And at this point I am juggling 3 different romantic couples. They all weave together, they're all intertangled, you know, they're going to be the found family ultimately. Luckily I had some help. I was fortunate enough to be able to sit in on a Reedsy course this month, and the topic was how to plan your novel. Very perfect. And it gave me some ideas of things that I needed to tweak or watch out for as I was working with my outline. Reedsy is doing these courses every month that you can either purchase access to individually for $99 or for $249 you get access to the full year of them. That's a 60% discount over just buying them individually. And that will also get you extended access to the recordings and monthly office hours with a professional. On April 6th, they have one called Novel Revision, Going Beyond the First Draft. That sounds great. And then they also have one on June 8th on how to find a literary agent. So for those of you who have asked me about things like classes and conventions, Seems like a really good deal for the amount of material you get based on what I saw on this first course that I watched. And a big thank you to Reedsy for reaching out to me and allowing me to sit in on the course. Also, one of the writers on my Discord server had messaged me and offered to like let me run my plot by her. So thank you, Ashlyn. You were very helpful. Ashlyn had a really good grasp of story structure, which, while in theory I should also have a good grasp of story structure, sometimes it really helps to just hear it from a different person, or even just to like bounce ideas. Even if you just have somebody in your life that doesn't know crap about story structure, but they are just willing to listen to you riff on what's hanging you up in your plot, I highly recommend it. And if you don't know anyone, this is also something that you might be able to use AI for, but I would also always recommend talking to an actual human. Still, I know there are some people who don't have a single person in their lives who would want to listen to them talk about a plot outline for like an hour. So, you know, you do what you can. So having written out like that basic outline with many a question still up in the air, I talked it out with Ashlyn. And I had a few big problems with this middle book. And some of these I've encountered before, which doesn't always make them easier to solve. Such as the characters that were the main characters in book 1. A lot of their initial, like, getting to know each other, romantic tension, and, like, interpersonal stuff had been resolved at the end of book 1. So I have the Dragon King, Harai, and he's a little boring as book 2 opens. It kind of feels like his whole thing has been resolved already. And like, yeah, he's still going to do king stuff. He's got to help the kingdom. But like, ultimately, I want him to have a little bit of a juicier growth arc in there. Not just being there like, well, we need to prepare the army for an attack. It's not like fun. So if you haven't already guessed from the new title, I'm going to shatter him. I'm gonna do bad stuff to Harai. But I had to figure out what bad stuff was I gonna do to him and how was he gonna react to it. I have, you know, done bad things to many a character. It's not enough to just be like, I'm gonna kill his family. You know, you gotta have a reason for how he's gonna grow as a result of this, and like it can't feel cheap. So I had to work that out, had to feel organic to the story. Then I had also written down that 2 of the characters, who are very nice people, are stuck in a situation where they're kind of surrounded by the antagonists. And I had thought that like, okay, they're going to find a way to be conniving because they need to escape. And what are they going to do that's conniving? I had a couple of different options. Like, one of them was a little more of like the darker choice. The first thing that came to mind was that they would start to observe the people around them and play on their insecurities or rivalries, pit them against each other, or encourage relationships that they knew were not really going to be good for the characters around them, but they're villains anyway, so, you know, whatever. They're going to start being, like, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but basically, like, the main villain has a crush on this other woman who's also somewhat of a villain, but my main girl here finds out that she's actually in a very bad situation, and she feels kind of sorry for her. But nevertheless, I was thinking, well, just to save her own skin, she might try to set them up together, even though she knows it's not going to be a good relationship for this other woman that she feels bad for. That was what I thought would be like a good plot. The problem that I was having with it is that it just didn't feel true to these characters. They are really, really good people. They're not conniving types. And it just kept bothering me that I felt like I was trying to force them to be like these intriguing, you know, scheming people that I just could not get there with them. I couldn't imagine them deciding that they were going to ruin the life of a woman that they felt bad for just to save themselves. So after talking about this, I realized that yes, I'm going about this all wrong. I need to stay true to who they are, and in this case, they're going to try to do the right thing, to play on the better side of these villains, and see if they can achieve their goals doing that. And once I started thinking about that, that helped enormously. Then just like in a broad sense, I had the problem of like so many main characters. I have 3 different groups at this point, and that is going to end up being 5 or 6 different points of view. It's almost like I'm writing 3 different books and then finding a way to connect them and cohere them together so that they seem like one book and not just 3 separate books. And this was a spot where the Reedsy course was really helpful for me, just to kind of like reorient me on what I needed to do with each character and the points that I needed to hit. One thing that was really interesting about the Reedsy course is in the first session, 5 things to plan before you start writing with Tom Bromley, and the second session, plot like a pro, the 3 core elements of story structure with Alyssa Matisic. Hopefully I'm pronouncing her name correctly. They both touched on like when you're thinking about characters to think of it with like 3 different points, but they had slightly different ones. Tom brought up change, causality, and complications, and Alyssa brought up objective, stakes, obstacles. They're similar, but they're a little different. And since this is a trilogy, I was thinking somewhat of like the objective is something that spans the entire trilogy, but just change is something that I'm going to think about for every book. How are each of these 3 characters in this middle book going to change, and what is going to prompt that change? So having gone through like my basic outline, it was now time to bust out these index cards. And I just wrote down each character's plot points on a separate stack of index cards. And I made sure that they were each getting their moments of change and thinking about what was going to get them there. And then when that was all done, then I started weaving them all together. And Ashlyn was asking me, like, what is each person's midpoint? And that helped me to think about, like, not only just what is their midpoint, but is there a way to kind of, like, have them all hit their midpoint at the same time, and is there a way to interconnect these midpoints with each other? So that was something that I considered as I was working on the outline. And one piece of advice I really loved from the Reedsy course, in Alyssa's presentation on plotting like a pro, she was talking about the messy middle, and she said to watch out for scenes where your characters are just like being happy, getting a good night's sleep, like nothing is happening, because that means that the plot is not propelling forward. Now, when you write books that lean a little more like romantic and cozy, you do want your characters to have moments where they are happy, but I feel like it's good to have the but floating behind the happiness, that there's still unresolved tensions. So another thing I was considering as I was kind of in like the middle of these outlines and I was working with the index cards, thinking about the scenes that occur, is am I giving my characters those beats where they do get to connect with each other and they're happy and they're bonding or like realizing what they're fighting for, but am I not losing sight of that there's still things that need to be resolved and what their ultimate goals are? I would also add to that another thing that I recommend watching out for in the middle is a scene where your character says something like, I'm not sure what to do, or as the narrator you're like, nothing much had happened for weeks. Like, if you're describing boring things going on, or your characters are expressing like they're not sure or nothing's happening, that's another signal that you need to take a look at your plot and like keep things moving. And another piece of advice that I loved from this course that feels actually very particularly pertinent to this story is to consider that both success and failure have consequences. That too often we think about the consequences of failure, but not the consequences of success. This book has some big themes about success and failure. So that was something I found myself thinking about, is I sometimes subverted my initial idea of what should happen because I was thinking in like terms of a book where everybody is going to ultimately succeed and that will be what's best for them. But actually in this book, it is a story where what might be best for them is failure. That might actually be what they desire. They just don't want to admit it. So thinking about those consequences was really important in thinking of how this plot is going to unfold. And that's one thing I love about going back to any of those fundamentals, reading books on writing advice, or listening to other writers or editors speak about their process or their ideas of how a story should unfold, is that no matter how much I study this stuff, and I've done it long enough that sometimes I break the rules, going back to those fundamentals when you're working on an outline is never a bad idea. And in the case of a book that's very complicated because you have many characters, it's going to be long, it's going to be several books at once, I think sometimes the best way to approach it is to first to like strip it down to the bare bones, the basics of good storytelling. And then once you really have that hammered down, then that's when you're going to build it up from there. And that's when you're going to figure out, how do I weave all these elements together? This might not be the method in particular that works for you. The 3rd and 4th sessions of the Reedsy course had multiple speakers, one for authors, one for editors, and I also really appreciate that just because it reminds me that everybody has their own process. Every book has its own process, and you have to kind of respect what that process is going to be. And for me, that has really varied from book to book. I have changed my plotting method almost every book that I've written. I have like something that works in general, but then every book has its own little things that it demands from me, and I just kind of have to figure out what they are and go with it from there. Originally, I thought that this book was going to be a duology, and as I was plotting it was like, no, it's got to be a trilogy. Just got to do it. So this one was definitely more complicated than usual, but now I've got it down, which means I am ready to get to work on this. And I feel very prepared because I just have my little stack, and all I have to do is write each scene that's on the top of the stack and just work my way through it. And when this pile has diminished to 0, well, then it's time to go back and reevaluate the whole thing, see if there's stuff that still isn't quite working. But this is detailed enough that I feel pretty confident that I'm going to be able to just like blow through this whole outline without having to stop and replot, because this was definitely the kind of book that demanded like a lot of plotting work up front before you really sit down to write the book. So I hope this was helpful for all of you who are trying to juggle big old projects like this. I'd love to know how you work on a big complicated book, if you have ever tried one, or if there's any problems you're having with a big complicated book or questions that you might have. It's a great time to ask those. If you enjoyed this video, my name is Lydia Foxglove and I'm a fantasy author. I have been making my living as a writer since 2009, and on this channel I talk about the writing craft, the creative life in general, both the emotional, practical, financial side of it, as well as sometimes just the simple life, books, other pertinent topics. So if that sounds good to you and you're not already subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button and stick around. If you'd like to read any of my books, there's a link in the description. If you'd like to check out that Reedsy course, there is a link in the description. And if you'd like more from me, I have a Patreon and a Substack. They both have a free tier with the same content on both, or a $5 subscription gets you access to bonus videos that members vote on, as well as my Discord. Or if you just want the bonus videos, you can sign up for my YouTube memberships. Thank you so much for all of your support, as always, just for being here. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you next time. Bye!